This is California. Once seen as the embodiment of the American dream, today it seems to be anything but.
California is home to the nation's largest homeless population, one of the most visible symptoms of the state's dual housing and homelessness crises.
In cities like Los Angeles, San Francisco, and San Diego, the cost of living has skyrocketed, making it increasingly difficult for residents to afford even basic necessities. The median home price in California has soared to over $910,000 in 2025, nearly triple the national average. Monthly payments for a typical mid-tier home have reached nearly $5,900, an 82% increase since 2020. Meanwhile, the state's cost of living index stands at 144.7, the third highest in the nation. Homelessness has also reached alarming levels, accounting for 24% of the nation's homeless population. In San Francisco alone, the homeless population grew by 7% in 2024 to over 8,000 people. Despite efforts to address these issues, resistance to new housing developments and zoning reforms continues to hinder progress. As a result, the gap between the wealthy and the struggling widens, leading many to seek opportunity elsewhere, and leaving many to question whether or not the California dream is even still attainable. But how did it even get like this? Well, we need to go back in time to understand it. But to make the historical context quick, we can start from when Hollywood turned LA into the world's film capital. The industry, initially based in New Jersey, moved to California in the 1910s to escape Thomas Edison's monopoly on the industry with all his film production patents. LA offered lenient courts, constant sunshine, and varied terrain, perfect for year-round filming, so it was decided on to be the destination. By 1920, Hollywood produced nearly all US films and 80% of the world's film revenue. Then, during World War II, California became the epicenter of the American boom. Federal contracts poured in. Factories in LA built bombers, shipyards in San Diego churned out vessels, and the Bay Area ran logistics for the entire Pacific. 17% of all US war production came from California. 10% of all defense spending went into the state. And with it came jobs, infrastructure, and opportunity. Even during the Cold War, much of this continued. Universities like Berkeley and UCLA expanded. Suburbs sprawled out along the new freeways, funded by the 1956 Federal Aid Highway Act. Homes were affordable. Public universities were practically free. From 1940 to 1960, the state's population more than doubled, from 7 million to over 15 million. Then came Silicon Valley. Stanford's military research grants and partnerships with private companies led to the rise of companies like Hewlett-Packard and Fairchild Semiconductor. The region became a magnet for defense money, talent, and eventually venture capital. Apple, Oracle, Intel, they all grew out of this ecosystem. By the 1990s, Silicon Valley was home to some of the most valuable companies in the world. Agriculture also transformed the state. California's Central Valley became one of the most productive farming regions on Earth, thanks to massive public water projects. You may think of the Midwest as the place to be for farming, but California is even greater. The state holds the top 9 agricultural counties in the entire nation, with San Joaquin Valley in Central California alone having the top 3. By 1971, California had overtaken New York as the largest state economy in the country, and it's never looked back since. Today, if California were a country, it would have the 4th largest economy in the world, bigger than Japan and the UK. This was the California dream, a booming economy, accessible education, and a middle-class life built on growth. But growth needs space, and that's where the cracks began to show. It started in the early 1970s, but before it was visible, it was political. 2 of California's most famous Republican politicians, Richard Nixon and Ronald Reagan, helped reshape the national approach to housing and public investment at this time. In 1973, Nixon's administration froze all new spending on federally subsidized housing, a move that effectively ended the era of large-scale public housing development. What began as a temporary moratorium morphed into a permanent policy, replacing construction funding with limited voucher programs and leaving cities to fend for themselves. Reagan took that dismantling further. As California's governor from 1967 to 1975, he fought to cut public funding for higher education and pushed to impose tuition in what once had been a tuition-free university system. Later as president, he slashed federal housing support, cutting the Department of Housing and Urban Development's budget by nearly 80% from 1981 to 1988. The private market, left without incentives or subsidies, had little reason to build for low-income renters. At the time, the population was booming, but home construction was now fully slowing down. To look at what happened beyond these broad political choices, we need to look at the more visible forces that collided to change the state's trajectory. First, cities began limiting how dense new housing could be by zoning large areas for single-family homes only. Then came environmental regulations that, while important, made land harder to develop. And finally, residents began demanding more control over what got built in their neighborhoods. Together, these trends quietly reshaped how the state grew. The effects took time to show, but by the 2010s, the shortage had become impossible to ignore. Between 2012 and 2017, California added just 1 new housing unit for every 5 new residents. In the Bay Area specifically, the ratio was even worse. 7 times as many jobs were created as housing units. And most of those jobs were in tech, centered in coastal cities where housing was already scarce. From 2012 to 2017, San Francisco alone added 400,000 jobs, but issued just 60,000 housing permits. This mismatch drove prices through the roof. By 2017, the median price of a home in California was more than 2.5 times the US average. In coastal areas, where most job growth has happened since the Great Recession, shortages were even worse. By 2018, California ranked 49th in housing units per resident, and by 2023, housing affordability reached a 16-year low. Just 16% of Californians could afford a median-priced home. In San Mateo and Santa Clara counties, buyers needed annual incomes of $504,000 and $451,000 just to enter the market. The situation isn't a good one. As of 2025, experts estimate California needs nearly 3.85 million new housing units, roughly 27% of the state's total housing stock, to address the shortage. And unless the state can quadruple its current pace of construction, prices and rents aren't going anywhere but up. California is now the 2nd most expensive state in the US for housing costs. And the rather beautiful, well, depressing thing about this stat is we know it's true because, thanks to Ground News, the sponsor of this video, we can check the rating of the bias in reporting. There's only 9 sources reporting on this, which isn't that much, but the fact they're mostly in the center is a great sign. These ratings come from an average of 3 independent news monitoring organizations, not Ground News themselves. You can even see who owns the sources of information. In a world of constant misinformation coupled with information overload, Ground News is one of the best things you can have to make sure you're getting accurate information. You can compare headlines to see the sensationalism, check the discrepancies, or even just get a quick breakdown of what's being reported on opposing sides. In a world more divided than ever, this is key to media literacy. So go to ground.news/versed to see through misleading media narratives and think critically about the news you read. You can scan this QR code or go to the link in the description, and if you subscribe through my link, you'll get 40% off the Vantage plan, which is the plan I have and gives me full access to all the features I mentioned. Anyways, it's not just about building more, but also whether cities are even allowed to build at all. If we look back at those 3 forces that have shaped California's housing gridlock since the 1970s, restrictive zoning, environmental constraints, and local resistance, all 3 still define the system today. Take zoning, for example. Modern zoning laws, rooted in 19th century Europe, were originally designed to separate industry from housing. But in California, they evolved into something else. In 2024, a study by UC Berkeley's Othering and Belonging Institute found that almost 96% of all residential land in the state is zoned for single-family homes. When you remove unincorporated rural areas, it's still 82%. That means in most neighborhoods, it's illegal to build anything other than a standalone house. No duplexes, no fourplexes, no apartments. Even in areas with good schools, transit access, and growing job markets, density is blocked by default. And that zoning has consequences. When cities don't allow more housing, prices rise. Fewer homes are built, commutes lengthen, and it's usually younger, lower-income residents who are locked out. In 2025, Bloomberg drew a sharp contrast between San Francisco and Austin. While rents in San Francisco kept climbing, Austin saw a 22% drop since mid-2023. City leaders there had done something California cities have resisted. They increased density, cut parking mandates, and streamlined the building process. Development picked up and prices went down. In places like San Francisco, where zoning rules remain strict and permits take years, that approach is still more theory than practice. Then there's the environmental issues. The California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA, was passed in 1970 to protect ecosystems from harmful development. But over time, it became a tool for delay. Projects often face lawsuits, not over environmental harm, but over things like parking or traffic. According to the Legislative Analyst's Office, CEQA appeals delay projects by an average of 2.5 years in the state's 10 largest cities, and only around 13% of CEQA lawsuits come from environmental groups. The majority are filed by groups with other agendas, like developers and rival real estate businesses. Then there's the tax policy. Thanks to Proposition 13, cities get more revenue from commercial projects like malls and car dealerships than from new homes. So local governments often zone for what makes money, not what meets housing needs. For example, the city of Brisbane was told a commercial development would net $9 million per year, while an option with more housing would rake in just $1 million. On the coast, the California Coastal Commission adds another layer of control, restricting development on average up to half a mile inland, or at a maximum of 5 miles for special circumstances. Originally created to preserve public beach access, the Commission now has a quasi-judicial authority over zoning decisions in some of the state's most valuable real estate. Its reach has blocked housing proposals across the coastline, including 895 homes in Orange County, 50 homes for disabled residents in Half Moon Bay, and 400 apartments in Ventura County. UCLA researchers found that homes within its jurisdiction cost 20% more than comparable homes just outside, largely due to restricted supply. A UCSB study found the Commission's limits increase prices, benefiting existing homeowners while locking out renters and new buyers. It's been called the most powerful land use authority in the US, and its policies often reflect the priorities of the state's political leadership, which continues to defend it as essential for environmental protection. All of this limits what can be built, where, and how fast. And yet, even when projects get approved, they often run into something else: people who simply don't want to buy them. This is where NIMBY enters the picture. Short for Not in My Backyard, NIMBY coalitions are oftentimes the local resistance that blocks affordable housing projects from getting the green light. NIMBYism has become one of the most entrenched barriers to housing in California, but also the entire United States. Residents frequently cite concerns over traffic, density, or neighborhood character to fight new development. But behind those concerns is a broader resistance to change, and a lot of times to newcomers. In San Francisco, NIMBY coalitions have stalled housing projects across the city. In 2024 alone, they organized against proposals at 955 and 1088 Sansom Street on the northeast waterfront, pushed for density caps in wealthier enclaves like Cow Hollow and the Marina, and blocked plans for 24 new homes in Pacific Heights by citing environmental concerns. These are neighborhoods that haven't seen any new housing in decades. Groups like Livable California have taken this opposition statewide. Founded in 2018, the organization rose to prominence by helping kill Senate Bill 827, which would have legalized more housing near transit. They also opposed SB 50, which sought to allow fourplexes in single-family neighborhoods. Livable California disputes the very existence of a housing crisis and advocates for slow growth policies that preserve low density, high prices, and exclusion. California Governor Gavin Newsom called it out directly, saying that NIMBYism is destroying the state. Another key driver for why living in California is becoming impossible is the energy crisis. California's energy costs are among the highest in the country. As of March 2025, Californians pay an average of 31.6 cents per kilowatt hour for residential electricity, nearly double the national average of 16.3 cents. In some counties, rates have soared past 40 cents. As for why, the state has committed to 100% clean electricity by 2045, under Senate Bill 100. But meeting that goal means building out renewables, solar, wind, battery storage, while still maintaining an aging grid. That grid is part of the problem. More than 70% of California's transmission lines and transformers are over 25 years old. The system was built for centralized fossil fuel plants, not the dispersed generation of solar and wind. When supply drops at sundown, utilities scrambled to import power, driving up costs. The 2020 rolling blackouts made national headlines, but even today, new transmission lines are mired in delay. Then there's the utility structure. Pacific Gas and Electric, California's largest, serving 16 million people primarily in Central and Northern California, is a for-profit monopoly. After $30 billion in wildfire liabilities and a bankruptcy filing in 2019, PG&E has pushed through multiple rate hikes. As of 2024, the utility's residential rates average 46.8 cents per kilowatt hour, which is almost 3 times the national average. And the overall statewide average in California is still 105% more than the nationwide average. Layered onto this are public purpose surcharges, fees that help fund wildfire prevention, solar incentives, and programs for low-income households. While these initiatives serve important goals, they collectively add billions to consumer bills. And because many of these fees are fixed or unavoidable, even households that use very little electricity still end up paying significantly more than expected. And yet, unlike Texas or Arizona, California has some of the highest barriers to new energy development. Environmental review processes under CEQA, the same law that slows housing, can stall solar and battery storage projects for years. Ironically, this means California's clean energy push is partly tripped up by its own red tape. Higher housing and energy costs exacerbate inequality, drive people towards homelessness, and force relocation. The housing crisis alone has added 6 percentage points to the state's poverty rate and created some of the longest commutes in the country. Overall, California has the highest poverty rate in the US at 18.9, according to the Supplemental Poverty Measure, a government metric that's far more accurate than the official poverty measure. Unlike the official measure, which only looks at pre-tax income, the supplemental measure accounts for after-tax income, adjusts for local costs like housing, and includes benefits such as food stamps and tax credits. That strain is displacing workers, first inland, then out of the state entirely. Known as the California Exodus, hundreds of thousands of Americans are leaving California every single year, most often to more affordable states like Texas, Arizona, and Nevada. It regularly ranks number 1 in domestic net migration losses. And of the top 20 cities for move-outs nationally, California accounts for 7. Today, the cities with the highest share of supercommuters, those who travel 90 minutes or more each way, aren't in LA or San Francisco, but in Stockton, Modesto, and Riverside. These workers are still tethered to coastal job centers, but pushed out by housing costs. That sprawl has environmental consequences. With California's electricity grid largely decarbonized, transportation is now the state's largest source of emissions. Longer commutes mean more driving, more traffic, more costs, and more carbon. Urban planning experts have pointed to infill development, building more densely in existing urban areas, as the most effective way to reduce emissions. Yet restrictive zoning and NIMBY resistance continue to block that path. Nowhere is this more apparent than in California's struggle with homelessness. Local resistance doesn't just oppose new housing, it frequently targets shelters and services for the homeless. Through zoning restrictions, public hearings, and legal appeals, NIMBY coalitions have prevented or delayed countless projects. These local restrictions have statewide consequences. As of January 2024, California had over 187,000 homeless residents, nearly a quarter of the national total. 2/3 of them are unsheltered, the highest rate in the country. Despite billions spent on housing and outreach, the problem has continued to grow. In Los Angeles County alone, more than 75,000 people are currently homeless. In San Francisco, estimates range from 7,000 to 10,000. And while drug use and mental illness often dominate the public narrative, research shows that high housing costs are the leading cause. A 2022 UCSF study found that rent burden was a very strong predictor of homelessness rates across California cities. People are priced out of housing before they ever fall into crisis. How this translates to living is that day to day, many residents of places like downtown LA, Oakland, or San Francisco's Tenderloin, for example, have talked about the encampments everywhere, public mental health crises, aggressive confrontations, streets littered with garbage, and of course crime, as that's what breeds with instability. In short, California's homelessness crisis is inseparable from its housing politics. And for many communities, the default response has been to keep the problem out of view, which creates a cycle. So what can be done? California's housing and affordability crisis has triggered a legislative avalanche in recent years. After decades of restrictive zoning, sluggish permitting, and political gridlock, state leaders have started to push back. The most important change came in 2017 with a landmark housing package under Governor Jerry Brown. It allows developers to bypass lengthy planning and environmental reviews in cities that aren't meeting their state-mandated housing goals. It was designed to force action where local governments had stalled for years. Cities like Sacramento eliminated parking minimums, and statewide, parking mandates were removed for buildings near public transit. While the goal was to help California reach 180,000 new units per year by adding an extra 100,000 a year, the results have been underwhelming. SB 35 has only produced around 14,000 units statewide since its passage, or just 2,300 a year, just a fraction of what's needed. Still, momentum has grown. In 2021, Governor Newsom signed SB 9 and SB 10 to allow duplexes and multi-unit housing in single-family zones and streamline development around transit. YIMBY groups, basically the opposite of NIMBY groups, are now suing cities under the Housing Accountability Act when local officials try to block projects that comply with state law. In 2023, the legislature passed Senate Bill 423 under Governor Gavin Newsom, extending SB 35 through 2036 and expanding it to include coastal zones, which had previously been exempt. That means that even the most exclusionary cities will now be subject to the same accountability rules. And while most of these fights happen at the policy level, some success stories are emerging on the ground. In San Francisco, the 588 Apartments project created hundreds of affordable units in a high-cost area by taking advantage of state-level incentives and local political will. It's now one of the largest affordable developments in the city's history, praised for its thoughtful design and close proximity to transit and jobs. In Los Angeles, Star Apartments offers permanent supportive housing for formerly homeless residents, built using modular construction to cut both costs and timelines. The project includes medical and mental health services on site and received LEED Platinum certification for sustainability, proof that affordability and climate goals can align. Still, until the pace of building matches the scale of demand, California will remain stuck in an affordability crunch of its own making. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more content just like this. I'll see you in the next one.